In a world where identity theft has become commonplace and trust is a luxury few can afford, imagine being arrested for being yourself. Picture the cold steel of handcuffs biting into your wrists as officers refuse to believe you are who you claim to be. Now imagine that your only salvation lies in a mysterious mark on your body, a mark that would change everything when the right person saw it. This is not a work of fiction. This is not a movie plot. This is the extraordinary true story of Elena Vasquez, a woman whose life was turned upside down in a single moment, only to be transformed forever by an impossible coincidence that defied all odds. What you're about to read challenges everything you think you know about fate, identity, and the power of human connection. It's a story that begins with injustice and ends with redemption, but the journey between those 2 points will leave you questioning whether some things in life are truly meant to be. Buckle up. This ride gets wild from the very first page. Elena Vasquez had always believed that truth was like the morning sun, inevitable, bright, and impossible to ignore. On that Tuesday morning in September, as she walked through the automatic doors of the downtown Social Security office, she carried that belief with her like a shield. She had no way of knowing that within the next hour, her faith in truth would be shattered like glass hitting concrete. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Elena approached the reception desk, her worn leather purse clutched tightly in her hands. At 28 years old, she had the kind of face that people remembered, high cheekbones inherited from her grandmother, eyes the color of dark coffee, and a scar just above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident involving her brother's bicycle and a steep hill. She had come to update her address after moving to a new apartment, a simple administrative task that should have taken 30 minutes at most. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked up with the expression of someone who had seen too many faces and heard too many stories. Elena handed over her driver's license and Social Security card, documents she had carried for years without question. The woman's fingers moved across her keyboard with mechanical precision, but then something changed. Her typing stopped abruptly, and she frowned at her computer screen. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait here for a moment," the receptionist said, her voice carrying a new edge of suspicion. She picked up her phone and spoke in hushed tones to someone Elena couldn't identify. The words verification and discrepancy drifted across the desk like warning bells. Elena felt the first flutter of unease in her stomach. Around her, the office continued its normal rhythm. People filing forms, children fidgeting in plastic chairs, the constant hum of government bureaucracy. But something had shifted in her small corner of this world, like a stone thrown into still water. 15 minutes passed before the receptionist returned with a man Elena had never seen before. He was tall and thin, with the kind of mustache that belonged in 1980s police drama, and he wore the unmistakable expression of someone with authority who enjoyed using it. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, though his tone suggested he doubted that was really her name. "I'm Mr. Henderson, the supervisor here. We need to discuss some irregularities with your documents." Elena's heart rate quickened. "What kind of irregularities?" "These are my documents. I've had them for years." Henderson's eyes narrowed as he studied her face, comparing it to something Elena couldn't see. "According to our records, the Social Security number you've provided belongs to someone else entirely. Someone who died 3 years ago in a car accident in Phoenix, Arizona." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself, her mind racing to process what she had just heard. "That's impossible. This is my Social Security number. I've been using it my entire adult life. I've filed taxes with it, opened bank accounts, applied for jobs." "Ma'am, I understand this might come as a shock," Henderson interrupted, though his tone suggested he understood nothing of the sort. "But identity theft is a serious federal crime. I'm going to have to ask you to remain here while we contact the appropriate authorities." The next 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Elena sat in a hard plastic chair, surrounded by people going about their normal business while her world crumbled around her. She called her employer to explain she would be late, then called her sister Maria, but could barely find the words to explain what was happening. How do you tell someone that, according to the government, you don't exist? The police officers who arrived were professional but firm. Officer Janet Morrison was a compact woman with short blonde hair and eyes that had seen enough of the world to maintain a healthy skepticism about everyone's story. Her partner, Officer Derek Santos, was younger and seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but he followed Morrison's lead without question. Elena Vasquez, Morrison said, reading from her notepad, "You're under arrest for identity theft and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The words of the Miranda rights washed over Elena like water, familiar from countless television shows and movies, but surreal when applied to her own life. She felt the cold metal handcuffs close around her wrists, the click echoing in the suddenly quiet office. Everyone was staring now. Other customers, employees, even the security guard by the door. She had become a spectacle, a criminal in their eyes, all because a computer said she was someone else. The ride to the police station passed in a blur of city streets and mounting panic. Elena tried to think of anyone who could vouch for her identity, anyone who had known her long enough to prove she was who she claimed to be. But as she thought about it, she realized how transient modern life could be. She had moved cities for college, then again for work. Her old friends were scattered across the country, connected only through social media. Her family lived 2 states away. Even her current co-workers had only known her for 6 months. At the station, the booking process stripped away what remained of her dignity. They took her fingerprints, photographed her from multiple angles, and confiscated her belongings. The female officer who processed her was efficient but not unkind, explaining each step as if Elena were a confused tourist rather than an accused criminal. "Honey," the officer said as she handed Elena a gray jumpsuit, "I've seen this kind of thing before. Identity theft rings are getting more sophisticated every year. But the truth has a way of coming out. If you really are who you say you are, the system will figure it out eventually." Eventually. The word hung in the air like a promise that might never be fulfilled. Elena changed into the jumpsuit, the fabric rough against her skin, and tried to process the magnitude of her situation. She was in jail, accused of stealing the identity of a dead woman, with no way to prove she was herself. It was like something out of a nightmare, except she couldn't wake up. Her phone call was to her sister Maria, whose voice cracked with disbelief when Elena explained what had happened. "This is insane, Elena. You're you. You've always been you. How can they say you're not?" "I don't know," Elena whispered, glancing around the holding area where she sat with 3 other women, each lost in their own legal troubles. "Maria, I need you to call Mom and Dad. Tell them what's happening. And see if you can find any old documents, birth certificate, school records, anything that proves I'm me." Of course. "Elena, we're going to fix this. This is just a mistake, a computer error or something. We'll get a lawyer." The call was cut short by the automated system, leaving Elena holding a dead phone and facing an uncertain night in a cell with a woman who had been arrested for stealing copper pipes and another who kept muttering about government conspiracies. As Elena lay on the thin mattress that night, staring at the ceiling of her cell, she thought about identity in a way she never had before. Who was she, really, if not the collection of documents and records that society used to define her? Was she the memories in her head, the scars on her body, the relationships she had built? Or was she just a name in a computer database, as fragile and changeable as any other piece of data? The small window near the ceiling showed a slice of night sky, stars barely visible through the urban light pollution. Elena found herself focusing on one star in particular, a bright point of light that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Her grandmother had once told her that stars were the spirits of people who had lived with purpose, burning bright even after their time on Earth was done. Elena wondered if somewhere among those stars was the spirit of the woman whose identity she was accused of stealing, and what that woman might think of this bizarre situation. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the sounds of the jail. Conversations in languages she couldn't identify, the clang of metal doors, the occasional outburst from someone struggling with their own demons. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind cycling through the events of the day like a broken record player. In one particularly vivid dream, she was standing in front of a mirror that showed not her reflection, but the face of a stranger, the woman whose identity she was accused of stealing. The dream woman had Elena's eyes, but different features, and she spoke with a voice Elena had never heard but somehow recognized. "You're carrying something that doesn't belong to you," the dream woman said. "But you're also carrying something that does. The truth isn't always what the papers say." Elena woke with a start, her heart pounding and her jumpsuit damp with sweat. The cell was dark except for the pale light filtering in from the corridor, and her cellmates were asleep. She touched her face, as if to reassure herself that it was still her own, and felt the familiar scar above her eyebrow, a mark that had been there so long she rarely thought about it. But there were other marks too, she realized as her hand moved across her skin. A small birthmark on her neck that her family had always teased her about. A scar on her palm from a kitchen accident when she was 12. A tiny tattoo behind her ear that she had gotten on her 18th birthday. A simple star that most people never noticed. These were the true documents of her identity, she thought. Not the papers in some government file, but the history written on her own body. The question was whether anyone else would see it that way, or if she would remain trapped in this bureaucratic nightmare until she could prove she existed in a way that satisfied the system. Morning came with the sounds of the jail waking up, guards making rounds, breakfast being served, the daily routine that marked time in a place where freedom was measured in phone calls and visiting hours. Elena had been awake for hours, watching the slice of sky visible through her window change from black to deep blue to pale gray. When the guard came to tell her she had a visitor, Elena's heart leaped with hope. Maybe Maria had found something, some document that would unravel this whole mess. Maybe her parents had driven through the night to help her. Maybe this nightmare was about to end. But as she was led through the corridors of the jail, handcuffed again for the short walk to the visiting area, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her real journey was just beginning. The dream woman's words echoed in her mind. Something that doesn't belong, something that does. What could that possibly mean? The visiting room was a sterile space with metal tables and plastic chairs, divided by a thick glass wall with phones for communication. Elena scanned the room for Maria's familiar face, but stopped short when she saw who was actually waiting for her. Sitting across from the glass partition was a man she had never seen before, wearing a military uniform with stars on his shoulders. He was older, maybe 60, with graying hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of a lifetime of command. His eyes were studying her with an intensity that made Elena's skin crawl with unease. As she approached the table, the general, for that's clearly what he was, leaned forward and picked up the phone on his side. Elena hesitantly did the same on hers. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My name is General Marcus Webb. I understand you're in quite a predicament." Elena stared at him, her confusion evident on her face. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Do we know each other? Why are you here?" The general's expression was unreadable as he studied her face through the glass. "No, we don't know each other. But I received a very interesting phone call this morning from someone in the Social Security Administration. They mentioned your case and certain details that caught my attention." "What kind of details?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. General Webb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving across her face as if searching for something specific. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost uncertain. "Ms. Vasquez, I need you to answer a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you have any marks on your body that you consider unusual? Scars, birthmarks, anything that someone might have told you is distinctive?" Elena's hand instinctively went to her neck, where the small birthmark had always been. "Why? What does that have to do with anything?" The general leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she had entered the room, Elena saw something that looked like recognition in his eyes. But recognition of what? Or whom? Ms. Vasquez, he said slowly. I think we need to talk. The silence stretched between Elena and General Webb like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. Elena's mind raced as she tried to understand why a military general would be interested in her case, why he was asking about marks on her body, and why his eyes held a recognition that made no sense given that they had never met. General Webb, Elena said slowly, choosing her words carefully, I'm confused about why you're here. I was arrested for identity theft yesterday. I don't understand what that could possibly have to do with the military or with you specifically. The general set down his phone for a moment and rubbed his temples, as if trying to decide how much to reveal. When he picked up the phone again, his expression had shifted from professional curiosity to something more personal, more conflicted. Ms. Vasquez, what I'm about to tell you needs to remain confidential, at least for now. 28 years ago, I was involved in a classified operation that went terribly wrong. People died, documents were lost or destroyed, and a child disappeared. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What does that have to do with me? The child was an infant, barely 6 months old. Her parents were killed in what was supposed to be a routine extraction mission in Central America. The baby was injured but alive, and she had a very distinctive mark, a crescent-shaped birthmark on the left side of her neck. Elena's hand flew to her neck, covering the mark that had been there as long as she could remember. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure the general could hear it through the phone. General Webb continued, his voice heavy with years of carrying secrets. The child was supposed to be placed with a family in the witness protection program. New identity, new life, complete break from the past. But there was an attack on the convoy transporting her, and in the chaos that followed, several children were separated from their handlers. Some were found, some were placed with emergency foster families, and some just disappeared into the system with whatever identity documents were available. You think I'm that child? Elena whispered, the words barely audible even to herself. I don't think anything yet, Webb replied, though his eyes suggested otherwise. But when the Social Security Administration contacted our office about a woman using the identity of someone who died in Phoenix and mentioned that she had a crescent-shaped birthmark on her neck, I knew I had to see for myself. Elena stared at the general through the glass partition, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The story sounded like something out of spy novel, too fantastic to be real. But the birthmark on her neck was real, and so was the fact that her Social Security number apparently belonged to a dead woman. My parents, she said slowly, the people who raised me, are they involved in this somehow? General Webb's expression grew somber. Ms. Vasquez, I need to ask you some questions about your childhood. Do you remember anything before the age of 3 or 4? Do you have any early memories that seem unusual or out of place? Elena thought back to her earliest memories, searching for anything that might support this impossible story. Most of her childhood memories were warm and normal. Family dinners with her parents and Sister Maria, camping trips in the mountains, Christmas mornings filled with laughter and presents. But now that she really focused, she realized that her memories seemed to begin abruptly around age 4, with no gradual emergence from the fuzzy recollections of early childhood that most people experienced. I don't remember much before starting preschool, she admitted. But that's normal, isn't it? Most people don't remember being very young. Some don't, Webb agreed. But some do. Tell me about your parents. How did they explain your early years? Were there photo albums, baby pictures, stories about when you were born? Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her as she realized that she had never questioned the gaps in her family's documentation of her early life. There were photos of her as a young child, but none as an infant. Her parents had always said they lost most of their early pictures in a house fire when she was 3, and she had never thought to question that explanation. There was a fire, she said weakly. They lost all the baby pictures. Ms. Vasquez, I'm going to share something with you that may be difficult to hear. The operation I mentioned, it was called Operation Safe Harbor. It was designed to extract families who had been working undercover for American intelligence in various Central and South American countries. These families were in danger because their covers had been blown, and we were bringing them back to the United States for their safety. The general paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Your biological parents were Maria and Carlos Mendoza. They had been living in Honduras for 3 years, gathering intelligence on arms trafficking through the region. When their cover was blown, we moved to extract them and their infant daughter. Ew. Elena felt the room spinning around her. That's impossible. My name is Elena Vasquez. My parents are Roberto and Carmen Vasquez. I have a sister named Maria. I grew up in New Mexico. This is my life. I understand this is overwhelming, Webb said gently, but I need you to consider the possibility that the life you remember was constructed to protect you. Roberto and Carmen Vasquez were likely part of the network that helped place children whose families had been lost during these operations. They may not have known your true origins themselves, or they may have been sworn to secrecy to protect you. Elena's mind reeled with the implications. If what the general was saying was true, then everything she knew about herself was a lie. Her parents weren't her parents, her sister wasn't her sister, and even her name wasn't her own. She was literally living someone else's life, a life that had been carefully constructed to hide her true identity. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. If this operation was classified, why risk exposing it for someone you're not even sure is the right person? General Webb was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of personal pain. Because I was the commanding officer on that mission. The attack that separated you from your handlers, it happened because I made a tactical error. I sent the convoy down a road that I thought was secure, but it wasn't. 3 good agents died that day, and several children were lost in the system. I've been carrying that guilt for 28 years. The human cost of classified operations was something Elena had never considered. She had always thought of military and intelligence work in abstract terms, as things that happened to other people in faraway places. But sitting across from General Webb, she could see the toll that those operations took on the people who carried them out. If I am this child, Elena said slowly, what happens now? Do I get my real identity back? Do I find out who I really am? That's complicated, Webb admitted. The records from Operation Safe Harbor are still classified. Even if we could prove your identity, revealing it might put you in danger from the same people who killed your parents 28 years ago. Some of these criminal organizations have long memories and longer reach. Elena felt trapped between 2 impossible realities. In one, she was Elena Vasquez, an ordinary woman who had been falsely accused of identity theft and was sitting in jail for a crime she didn't commit. In the other, she was someone else entirely, a ghost from a classified operation who had been living a lie her entire adult life. I need proof, she said firmly. If you want me to believe this story, I need more than just a birthmark and some convenient explanations for gaps in my memory. General Webb nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. I've already initiated a DNA comparison using the samples taken during your booking process. We have DNA from items that belong to Maria and Carlos Mendoza. If you are their daughter, we'll know within 48 hours. And if you're not, then this is an incredible coincidence, and I'll do everything in my power to help you resolve your identity theft case through normal channels. But, Ms. Vasquez, I've been in this business for 35 years, and I don't believe in coincidences this big. Elena stared at her reflection in the glass partition, studying her own features as if seeing them for the first time. Were her high cheekbones inherited from Maria Mendoza instead of Carmen Vasquez? Did her dark eyes carry the genetics of people she had never known? The face looking back at her was the same face she had seen in mirrors her entire life, but now it felt like a stranger's. There's something else, Webb said, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. Something I haven't told you yet. Elena's stomach tightened with dread. What? You had a brother. Twin brother, actually. Born 2 minutes after you. He was separated from you during the same attack that scattered the convoy. We never found him. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. A twin brother. Somewhere in the world, there might be another person who shared her genetics, her history, her loss. Someone who might be living his own constructed life, unaware of his true origins. Where is he? Do you know what happened to him? Webb shook his head sadly. We assume he was placed with another family, given another identity. For all we know, he could be living anywhere in the United States or even abroad. The chaos of that day scattered children across multiple agencies and organizations. Some ended up with official adoptive families, others with individuals who were simply trying to help. Elena thought about all the people she had met in her life, all the casual encounters and brief friendships. Had she ever unknowingly met her brother? Had they passed each other on the street, sat near each other in restaurants, lived parallel lives without ever knowing their connection? If the DNA test confirms who I am, she said, will you help me find him? If you are Maria and Carlos Mendoza's daughter, then finding your brother becomes a priority. But you need to understand that this search could take years, and it might put both of you at risk. The people who killed your parents may still be out there, and they might not appreciate having their old business reopened. Elena weighed the risks against the possibility of finding a piece of herself she never knew was missing. The idea of having a twin brother was both thrilling and terrifying. Would they be similar? Would they have the same mannerisms, the same way of thinking? Or would their different upbringings have created two completely different people who happen to share the same DNA? General Webb, she said, assuming the DNA test confirms your suspicions, what would you need me to do? First, we would need to establish a new identity for you, your real identity. That would involve unsealing classified records, which requires approval from several agencies and possibly congressional oversight. Second, we would need to ensure your safety during the transition. And third, we would need your cooperation in helping us understand what happened to the other children who were lost that day. Elena realized that she was being asked to choose between the comfortable lie of her current life and the dangerous truth of her origins. The Elena Vasquez identity might be false, but it was safe and familiar. Reclaiming her real identity as the daughter of Maria and Carlos Mendoza would mean stepping into a world of classified operations, government bureaucracy, and potential danger. But it would also mean finding out who she really was. There's one more thing you should know, Webb said, glancing around the visiting room as if to make sure they weren't being overheard. Your parents, your biological parents, they weren't just intelligence assets. They were heroes. The information they gathered saved hundreds of lives and disrupted a major arms trafficking operation that was supplying weapons to terrorist organizations throughout Central America. Elena felt a surge of pride, mixed with grief for people she couldn't remember. If Webb's story was true, then her parents had died protecting innocent people, and she was their legacy, a living reminder of their sacrifice. How long do you think it will take to get the DNA results? She asked. I've expedited the process. We should have preliminary results by tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening, in less than 24 hours, Elena might know for certain whether her entire life had been based on a carefully constructed lie. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. As their visiting time drew to a close, Elena found herself studying General Webb's face, looking for any sign that he might be lying or manipulating her. But his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen too much truth to bother with deception, and his manner suggested the weariness of someone carrying old guilt. General, she said as he prepared to hang up the phone, why did you really come here? You could have ordered the DNA test without meeting me face to face. Webb smiled sadly. Because for 28 years, I've wondered what happened to that little girl with the crescent moon on her neck. I wondered if she was safe, if she was happy, if she even survived. When I got that call from the Social Security Administration, I knew I might finally have a chance to answer those questions. Elena watched as the general stood to leave, his military bearing intact despite the emotional weight of their conversation. As the guard came to escort her back to her cell, Elena realized that regardless of what the DNA test revealed, her life had already changed forever. The questions Webb had raised about her identity, her family, and her origins couldn't be unasked or unanswered. That night, as she lay on the thin mattress in her cell, Elena stared at the small window and tried to process everything she had learned. The stars visible through the glass seemed different now, no longer distant points of light, but possible witnesses to the events that had shaped her life. Somewhere among those stars, according to her grandmother's beliefs, were the spirits of Maria and Carlos Mendoza, if they really were her parents. Elena touched the crescent-shaped birthmark on her neck and wondered if it might be a kind of star map, a celestial marking that had guided her through 28 years of unknowing exile to this moment of potential recognition. Tomorrow, she might finally know who she really was. The only question was whether she was brave enough to handle truth. Elena woke before dawn to the sound of her cellmate mumbling in her sleep about stolen copper pipes and government surveillance. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, potentially the subject of an actual government conspiracy, listening to someone else's paranoid delusions. The gray light filtering through the small window cast everything in shades of uncertainty, matching Elena's mental state perfectly. She had spent most of the night alternating between hope and terror. Hope that the DNA results would provide answers and possibly her freedom. Terror that those same answers would destroy everything she thought she knew about herself and the people she loved. There was also a third emotion that she was reluctant to acknowledge: excitement. Despite the fear and confusion, part of her was thrilled by the possibility that her life might be more extraordinary than she had ever imagined. The breakfast cart arrived with its usual collection of institutional food: watery, scrambled eggs, burnt toast, and coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a gym sock. Elena picked at her food while her mind wandered to the family she had grown up with. Roberto and Carmen Vasquez had been loving, attentive parents who had given her a stable childhood filled with warmth and laughter. Her sister Maria had been her best friend and confidant through all of life's ups and downs. If General Webb's story was true, had they all been living a lie for 28 years? Or had Roberto and Carmen genuinely believed that Elena was their biological daughter? The thought of confronting them with Webb's allegations made Elena's stomach churn. How do you ask the people who raised you whether your entire relationship is based on deception? Around mid-morning, Elena was surprised to learn she had another visitor. This time, it was her sister Maria, whose eyes were red-rimmed from crying and lack of sleep. Maria had driven through the night to reach the jail, and she looked exhausted and desperate. "Elena, thank God you're okay," Maria said as soon as she picked up the visitor phone. "Mom and Dad are flying this afternoon. We're going to get you the best lawyer money can buy. This whole thing is insane." Elena studied her sister's face, looking for any resemblance that might indicate they were truly related. Maria had always been the prettier one, with softer features and lighter skin that tanned easily in the summer. Their mother had always said that Maria took after her side of the family, while Elena favored their father's more angular features. But now Elena wondered if those explanations had been carefully crafted to hide the fact that she didn't resemble anyone in the family, because she wasn't actually related to them. "Maria," Elena said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you remember anything unusual about my early childhood? Anything that seemed strange or unexplained?" Maria frowned, clearly puzzled by the question. "Strange how?" "Elena, you're scaring me. What does this have to do with the identity theft charges? Just think for a minute. Do you have any memories of me as a baby? Do you remember Mom being pregnant with me?" "Elena, I was only 2 when you were born. Nobody remembers being 2 years old." Maria paused, her expression growing more concerned. "Why are you asking about this? Did someone put ideas in your head about our family?" Elena realized she was walking into dangerous territory. If her family genuinely didn't know about her origins, then revealing Webb's story would devastate them unnecessarily, especially if the DNA test proved him wrong. But if they did know, then her questions might alert them to the investigation. I'm just trying to understand how my identity could be mixed up like this, Elena said, choosing her words carefully. It's making me question everything. Maria leaned forward, pressing her hand against the glass partition. Elena, listen to me. You're my sister. You're my parents' daughter. I don't care what some computer says or what bureaucrats think they know. We have 28 years of memories together. That's real. That's proof. The sincerity in Maria's voice was overwhelming. Either Maria was an excellent actress, or she genuinely believed that Elena was her biological sister. Elena felt tears threatening to spill over as she realized that regardless of what the DNA test revealed, her relationship with Maria might never be the same. Even if they weren't blood relatives, Maria had been the most important person in Elena's life for as long as she could remember. Maria, I need you to do something for me, Elena said. I need you to look through all our old family photos and documents. Anything from my early childhood. Look for inconsistencies, things that don't make sense. Elena, you're talking like a conspiracy theorist. Our family is normal. We have normal problems, normal histories, normal relationships. There's no mystery here. Elena wanted to tell Maria about General Webb, about Operation Safe Harbor, about the possibility that their entire family might be built on a foundation of classified secrets. But she couldn't risk it, not until she knew for certain what the truth was. The visit ended with Maria promising to return the next day with her parents and a lawyer. As Elena watched her sister walk away, she felt the weight of secrets pressing down on her like a physical force. How many families, she wondered, were carrying similar hidden truths? How many people were living constructed lives without ever knowing it? The afternoon passed slowly, marked by the routine activities of jail life. Elena participated in the mandatory counseling session, sat through a class on addiction recovery that didn't apply to her situation, and spent time in the small exercise area walking in circles while her mind raced through every detail of Webb's story. As evening approached, Elena found herself watching the door to the visiting area with increasing anxiety. Webb had said the preliminary DNA results would be available by tonight, but what if the test had been delayed? What if there had been a problem with the samples? What if Webb had decided that the whole thing was too risky to pursue? When the guard finally came to tell her she had a visitor, Elena's heart was pounding so hard she felt lightheaded. The walk to the visiting area seemed to take forever, and when she finally saw General Webb sitting at the same table as before, his expression was unreadable. Ms. Vasquez, Webb said as Elena sat down and picked up the phone. I have the results. Elena gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. And Webb was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the same intense scrutiny as before. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. The DNA is a match. You are Maria Elena Mendoza, daughter of Maria Carmen Mendoza and Carlos Antonio Mendoza. You were born on March 15, 1998, in a military hospital in Honduras during Operation Safe Harbor. The words hit Elena like a tsunami, washing away everything she thought she knew about herself and leaving her gasping for emotional air. She was not Elena Vasquez. She was Maria Elena Mendoza, named after a mother she couldn't remember and carrying the genes of people who had died as heroes in service to their country. Are you certain? She whispered, though she could see the certainty in Webb's eyes. Positive. The match is conclusive. You are the daughter we lost 28 years ago. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, though she wasn't sure if they were tears of relief, grief, or fear. Everything she had believed about her identity had just been confirmed as a lie, but at the same time, she finally had answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask. What happens now? She asked. Now we begin the process of reclaiming your true identity and finding out what happened to your adoptive family. But first, I need to ask you something important. Do you want to pursue this? Once we open these files and start making official inquiries, there's no going back. Your life as Elena Vasquez will effectively end. Elena thought about Maria's tear-stained face, about Roberto, and Carmen Vasquez, who were flying across the country to help their daughter fight charges of identity theft that were technically true. She thought about her job, her friends, her apartment, all the small details that made up the life of Elena Vasquez. But she also thought about the parents she couldn't remember, about the sacrifice they had made, and about the brother she might have, a brother who might be somewhere in the world, living his own constructed life, and wondering why he felt different from everyone around him. "I want to know the truth," Elena said firmly. "All of it, even if it destroys everything else." Webb nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that. But you need to understand what you're asking for. Reclaiming your identity means entering a world where people have secrets that they'll kill to protect. It means potentially putting your adoptive family at risk. It means accepting that your life will never be normal or simple again. General, my life stopped being simple the moment I was arrested for being myself. At least this way, I'll know who I really am. All right then. The first step is getting you released from jail. I'm going to make some calls tonight, and by tomorrow morning, you should be free. The identity theft charges will be dropped because technically, you can't steal an identity that was given to you by the government." Elena felt a surge of relief that was quickly tempered by new anxieties. "What about my adoptive family? What am I supposed to tell them?" "That's complicated. We need to determine how much they knew about your origins. If they were unwitting participants in your placement, then we need to protect them from any potential backlash. If they were active participants in the cover-up, then we need to understand their motivations and ensure they don't interfere with our investigation." The thought that Roberto and Carmen might have been government agents all along was almost too much for Elena to process. These people had raised her, loved her, taught her right from wrong, helped her with homework, and cheered at her high school graduation. The idea that all of it might have been part of an elaborate deception was heartbreaking. "How do we find out what they knew?" Elena asked. "Very carefully. We'll conduct background checks, analyze their history, and look for any connections to intelligence agencies or organizations involved in Operation Safe Harbor. But we need to do this without alerting them to the investigation until we know where they stand." Elena realized that she was being asked to become a spy in her own family, to watch and analyze the people who had raised her for signs of deception or hidden knowledge. It felt like a betrayal of everything they had meant to each other. "There's something else," Webb continued. "We've located some of the other children who were separated during the attack on the convoy. 3 have been found living normal lives under assumed identities, similar to yours. 2 are still missing, including your brother." Elena's heart leaped at the mention of her brother. "Have you contacted the ones you found? Do they know about their origins?" "One does. She figured out on her own several years ago and has been quietly searching for information about her biological parents. The other 2 have no idea, and we're trying to determine the best way to approach them." Elena tried to imagine what it would be like to receive a phone call or visit from General Webb, to have your entire understanding of your identity challenged by DNA evidence and classified documents. She wondered if the other children, now adults, would want to know the truth, or if some of them would prefer to continue living their constructed lives. "What about my brother? Do you have any leads?" Webb's expression grew somber. "Your brother is more complicated. We have reason to believe he wasn't placed with a family like you were. Our intelligence suggests he may have been taken in by the same criminal organization that killed your parents." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. "You mean he's been with the enemy this entire time?" "We don't know for certain, but it's a possibility we have to consider. If that's the case, then finding him becomes much more dangerous for everyone involved. He may not even know his true origins, or he may have been raised to hate everything his parents stood for. The idea that her twin brother might have been raised by the people who killed their parents was like something out of a nightmare." Elena tried to imagine what kind of person he might have become, what he might think about the world and his place in it. Would he be another victim of circumstance, or would he have become part of the organization that destroyed their family? "I have to find him," Elena said with determination. "Whatever the risks, whatever it takes. He's my brother. I understand your feelings, but you need to be realistic about what we might discover. The boy who was taken 28 years ago may not exist anymore. The man he's become might be someone you wouldn't recognize or want to know. Elena thought about her own transformation from Maria Elena Mendoza to Elena Vasquez. If circumstances could create such a complete change in identity, what might they do to someone raised in a completely different environment? But, regardless of what her brother had become, he was still her family, the only biological family she had left. General Webb, she said, I want to be involved in the search. I'm not going to sit on the sidelines while other people decide my fate or my family's fate. Ms. Mendoza, Webb said, using her real name for the first time, you're not trained for this kind of work. Intelligence operations require specific skills and experience that take years to develop. Then train me. You said yourself that people will kill to protect these secrets. If I'm already in danger just by existing, then I might as well be useful. Webb studied her for a long moment, and Elena could see him evaluating her potential as an operative rather than just a victim of circumstances. She realized that this might be her inheritance from Maria and Carlos Mendoza. Not just their DNA, but their courage and their willingness to risk everything for something greater than themselves. It's not that simple, Webb finally said. But I admire your determination. For now, let's focus on getting you released and establishing your legal identity. The search for your brother will be a long-term operation that requires careful planning and extensive resources. As their visit drew to a close, Elena felt as though she was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss of unknown possibilities. Behind her was the safe, familiar life of Elena Vasquez, comfortable, predictable, but built on lies. Ahead of her was the uncertain future of Maria Elena Mendoza. Dangerous, complicated, but authentic. One more question, Elena said as Webb prepared to leave. My adoptive parents will be here tomorrow. What am I supposed to tell them? For now, tell them as little as possible. Say that there's been a breakthrough in your case, and that the charges will likely be dropped soon. Don't mention me or anything we've discussed until we know more about their involvement. Elena nodded, though the thought of deceiving the people who had raised her made her stomach twist with guilt. Tomorrow, she would look into the eyes of Roberto and Carmen Vasquez and pretend to be their daughter while knowing that she was someone else entirely. That night, as Elena lay in her cell for what she hoped would be the last time, she thought about names and their power to define identity. For 28 years, she had been Elena Vasquez, a name that carried no weight of history or expectation. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of becoming Maria Elena Mendoza, a name that came with the legacy of parents who had died as heroes and a brother who might have become something else entirely. The stars visible through her small window seemed brighter than before, as if they were welcoming her back to her true identity. Elena, no, Maria Elena, touched the crescent-shaped birthmark on her neck and wondered if her parents had ever looked at this same patch of sky and hoped that their children would survive to see these same stars. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for the last time, she was still Elena Vasquez, a woman who had lived an honest life based on dishonest foundations, and who was about to trade everything she knew for everything she might discover. Elena's release from jail came at 9:47 a.m., precisely 49 hours after her arrest. She walked through the same doors that had seemed so ominous 2 days earlier, carrying the plastic bag containing her personal belongings and a head full of secrets that could reshape everything she thought she knew about her life. The morning sun felt different on her skin, warmer, more significant, as if it were shining on Maria Elena Mendoza for the first time in 28 years. Roberto and Carmen Vasquez were waiting in the parking lot, standing next to their blue sedan with expressions of relief and confusion written across their faces. Behind them stood Maria, who ran toward Elena as soon as she emerged from the building. The embrace between the sisters felt both familiar and strange. Elena found herself analyzing every sensation, wondering if this emotional connection was real or simply the product of years of shared experiences that weren't quite what they seemed. "Mija, thank God you're okay," Carmen said, using the endearment she had called Elena since childhood. Carmen was a small woman with graying hair and hands that were permanently stained from her work in the community garden. She hugged Elena with the fierce protectiveness of a mother whose child had been threatened, and Elena felt a stab of guilt at the deception she was about to perpetuate. Roberto was taller and quieter, a man who expressed love through actions rather than words. He had taught Elena to drive, helped her with math homework, and walked her down the aisle at her high school graduation when she was crowned homecoming queen. Now he studied her face with the same intensity General Webb had shown, though Roberto's scrutiny came from concern rather than suspicion. The lawyer said the charges were dropped. Roberto said in his careful English, still accented after 40 years in the United States. Some kind of computer error with the Social Security database. But, Elena, how does something like this happen? How does the government lose track of who you are? Elena felt the weight of Webb's coaching in her response. I don't understand it completely either, Papa. The lawyer said there were multiple database errors that created confusion about my identity. But it's resolved now. It wasn't exactly a lie, Elena told herself. There had been database errors, just not the kind that Roberto was imagining. But, as she looked into his eyes that had watched her take her first steps in the small house on Maple Street, Elena wondered what he would say if he knew the whole truth. The drive home took them through the familiar neighborhoods of Elena's childhood, past the elementary school where she had learned to read, the park where she had played soccer, the grocery store where Carmen still shopped for ingredients to make Elena's favorite meals. Everything looked the same, but Elena felt like she was seeing it through different eyes, the eyes of someone who was observing rather than belonging. The Vasquez family home was a modest two-story house with a front porch where Carmen grew tomatoes and herbs in mismatched containers. The living room was filled with photographs spanning 30 years, family vacations, birthday parties, school events, and holidays. Elena found herself studying these pictures with new scrutiny, looking for any sign that she didn't belong in this carefully documented history. But the photos told the story of a normal family with normal joys and struggles. There was 4-year-old Elena learning to ride a bicycle, 8-year-old Elena in her first communion dress, teenage Elena with braces and an awkward smile. If these pictures were part of an elaborate deception, it was the most thorough and loving deception Elena could imagine. "Sit, Mija," Carmen said, steering Elena toward the kitchen table that had been the center of family life for as long as Elena could remember. "You look too thin. I'll make you something to eat." As Carmen bustled around the kitchen preparing Elena's favorite sandwich, grilled cheese with sliced tomatoes, Maria sat across from Elena with an expression of barely contained curiosity. "Elena, I did what you asked," Maria said quietly. "I went through all our old photos and documents. And you're right, there are some strange things." Elena's heart rate quickened. "What kind of strange things?" Maria glanced toward the kitchen where Carmen was humming while she cooked, then pulled a small wooden box from her purse. "I found this in the back of Mom and Dad's closet, hidden behind some old tax returns. I think it's supposed to be your baby book, but it's different." Elena opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a collection of items that supposedly documented her early life. But as she examined them more closely, she could see what Maria meant. The baby book was store-bought and generic, filled out in Carmen's handwriting, but missing the personal touches that usually accumulate naturally over time. There were hospital bracelets, but they were for a baby born in Albuquerque, not the small town where the Vasquez family had supposedly been living when Elena was born. Most disturbing were the photographs. They showed a baby who looked like Elena, but the background were wrong. Elena recognized some of the locations as places the family had lived when she was older, not during her infancy. It was as if someone had carefully constructed a visual history using pictures taken over several years and arranged them to support a specific narrative. "There's more," Maria whispered, pulling out a manila envelope. "Birth certificate, Social Security card, vaccination records. They all look official, but the dates don't match up with what Mom and Dad always told us." Elena examined the documents, noting discrepancies that she would never have caught before her conversation with General Webb. The birth certificate listed her place of birth as Albuquerque General Hospital, but Roberto had always said Elena was born during a family visit to his cousin in Las Cruces. The Social Security card was issued several weeks after her alleged birth date, which was unusual for that era when most cards were processed within days. Maria, Elena said carefully, "What do you think this means?" Before Maria could answer, Carmen appeared with a plate of sandwiches and a pitcher of fresh lemonade. "What are you girls whispering about?" she asked with the forced cheerfulness of someone trying to restore normalcy to an abnormal situation. Elena and Maria exchanged glances, and Elena made a decision that would change their family forever. "Mom, we need to talk. All of us. There are some things about my identity that don't make sense, and I think you and Dad might know more than you've told us." Carmen's face went very still, and the pitcher in her hands trembled slightly. She set it down on the counter and called to Roberto, who was in the living room watching the news. "Roberto, come to the kitchen. We need to have a family meeting." The next few minutes felt like the longest of Elena's life. Roberto settled into his usual chair at the head of the table. Carmen sat beside him with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and Maria clutched Elena's arm as if anchoring herself for what was to come. "Mom, Dad," Elena began, spreading the contents of the wooden box on the table between them. "I found some inconsistencies in my early childhood records. Things that don't match up with what you've always told us. I need you to explain what's going on." Carmen looked at Roberto with an expression that conveyed years of silent communication between married couples. Roberto's shoulders sagged as if he had been carrying a heavy burden for a very long time. "Elena," Roberto said slowly, "there are some things we never told you because we wanted to protect you, because we love you and we wanted you to have a normal life." "What kind of things?" Maria demanded, though Elena could tell from her sister's voice that she was already afraid of the answer. Carmen reached across the table and took Elena's hands in hers. "Mija, you came to us when you were almost 3 years old. You weren't born our daughter, but you became our daughter in every way that mattered." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, even though she had been expecting them. Hearing the truth from Carmen's lips made it real in a way that General Webb's clinical explanation hadn't achieved. "Where did I come from?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know," Roberto said, and Elena could hear the honesty in his voice. "A social worker brought you to us in the middle of the night. She said your parents had been killed and that you needed a safe place to stay. She said it was temporary, just until they could find your relatives or make permanent arrangements. But the temporary arrangement became permanent," Carmen added, tears streaming down her face. "Weeks turned into months, and nobody came to claim you. You had nightmares at first, and you would cry for people we didn't know. But slowly, you became part of our family. We applied for adoption, and the social worker helped us get all the legal documents we needed." Elena felt her understanding of the world shifting like sand beneath her feet. "What was the social worker's name? What agency was she with?" Roberto and Carmen exchanged another look, and Elena could see them struggling with how much to reveal. "We were told not to ask too many questions," Carmen finally said. "The social worker said it was for your safety and ours. She said there were bad people who might hurt you if they found you, and that the best way to protect you was to give you a completely new identity." "So you knew," Elena said, though she wasn't sure whether she felt angry or grateful. "You knew I wasn't your biological daughter." "We knew you weren't born to us," Roberto said firmly. "But you were our daughter from the moment you walked into this house." "Nothing changes that, Elena. Nothing." Maria had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke up with a voice full of pain and confusion. "What about me? Am I adopted too? Have you been lying to me my whole life as well?" "No, Mija," Carmen said quickly. "You are our biological daughter. We had been trying to have another baby for years when Elena came to us. In a way, she was the answer to our prayers." Elena processed this information while watching the family dynamic shift around her. Maria was struggling with the revelation that her sister wasn't her biological sister, while Roberto and Carmen were clearly relieved to finally tell secrets they had been carrying for 28 years. "Tell me about the social worker," Elena said. "What did she look like? How often did she check on me?" "Her name was Linda Martinez," Carmen said. "She was a small woman, very professional, very serious. She checked on you regularly for the first few years, then less frequently. The last time we saw her was when you started high school. She said you had adjusted well and that we had done a good job raising you." Elena filed away the name Linda Martinez for her next conversation with General Webb. If Martinez had been the handler for Elena's placement, then she might have information about other children from Operation Safe Harbor. "Elena," Roberto said, "I need you to understand something. When we agreed to take you in, we thought we were just helping a child who had lost her parents. We didn't know anything about government operations or classified missions. We were just a couple who wanted to help. But you suspected there was more to it," Elena pressed. "The social worker's secrecy, the false documents, the warnings about bad people. That's not normal for regular adoption cases." Carmen nodded reluctantly. "We suspected, but we didn't ask. Sometimes it's better not to know things that could put your family in danger." Elena realized that Roberto and Carmen had made the same choice she was facing now. They had chosen love and safety over truth and answers. They had built a beautiful life based on willful ignorance, and they had given Elena 28 years of happiness and security. But they had also stolen 28 years of her true identity. "There's more," Elena said, knowing that this conversation was about to become even more difficult. "I've been contacted by someone from the military who believes he knows who my biological parents were." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Roberto leaned forward with an intensity Elena had rarely seen from him. "What kind of military person?" he asked. "What did he tell you?" Elena gave them a condensed version of General Webb's story, watching their faces for any sign that they had heard these details before. But Roberto and Carmen seemed genuinely shocked by the information about Operation Safe Harbor and the possibility that Elena's parents had been intelligence operatives. "This explains so much," Carmen whispered. "The social worker's secrecy, the false documents, the way she always seemed to be watching for something or someone." "Did she ever mention other children?" Elena asked. "Other families who were taking in kids under similar circumstances?" "She mentioned that we were part of a special program," Roberto said. "She said there were other families like us, helping children who couldn't be placed through normal channels. But she never gave us details." Elena felt a surge of hope. If there had been a network of families helping children from Operation Safe Harbor, then there might be records or contacts that could help locate her brother. "Elena," Maria said suddenly, "this military person, did he mention anything about other children? About siblings?" Elena hesitated, knowing that her answer would open another door that couldn't be closed. "Yes, I had a twin brother. He was separated from me during the same incident that killed our parents. He's still missing." Maria's face went white. "A twin brother? You have a twin brother out there somewhere." "Maybe. We don't know if he's alive, or what happened to him, or who might have taken him in." Carmen began crying harder, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Elena was telling them. "Mija, this is so much bigger than we ever imagined. These aren't just family secrets. These are government secrets. This could be dangerous." Elena reached across the table and took Carmen's hands, reversing their usual roles. "Mom, I need to find him. I need to find out what happened to my biological parents and why we were separated. I know it's dangerous, and I know it changes everything about our family, but I can't live with not knowing." Roberto stood up abruptly and walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the backyard where he had taught Elena to throw a baseball and where Carmen had grown the vegetables they ate with Sunday dinner. "Elena," he said without turning around, "if you pursue this, there's no going back. Once you open these doors, you can't close them again. And there's no guarantee that what you find will make you happy. I know, Papa, but I can't be Elena Vasquez anymore, knowing what I know now. I have to find out who Maria Elena Mendoza really is. The use of her real name seemed to crystallize something in the room. Maria gasped at hearing her sister called by a different name. Carmen's crying intensified, and Roberto turned from the window with tears in his eyes. "Then, we'll help you," Roberto said with the decisive tone he used when making important family decisions. "Whatever this costs us, whatever risks we have to take, we'll help you find your brother and learn the truth about your parents." Elena felt a rush of love for this man who had raised her. This man who was willing to risk his family's safety to help her reclaim an identity that didn't include him. "But, Elena," Carmen added, "promise me something. Promise me that no matter what you discover about your biological family, you won't forget that we're your family too. We may not share your blood, but we share 28 years of love." Elena stood up and embraced both Roberto and Carmen, feeling the solid reality of their affection even as everything else in her life became uncertain. "You'll always be my parents," she promised. "But now I need to find out who I was before I became your daughter." As the afternoon wore on, the family spent hours going through every document, photograph, and memory that might provide clues about Elena's origins or connections to other families in similar situations. They found contact information for Linda Martinez, though the phone number was 20 years old and probably no longer valid. They found receipts for clothes and toys that had been purchased in bulk, suggesting that the Vasquez family might have been one of several families receiving supplies for newly placed children. Most importantly, they found a small notebook in Carmen's handwriting that documented Elena's behavior and development during her first year with the family. The notes revealed details that Elena had never known, that she had initially spoken fragments of Spanish mixed with what sounded like English, that she had specific fears of loud noises and helicopters, and that she had repeatedly drawn pictures of a boy who looked just like her. "You drew the same boy over and over," Carmen explained, showing Elena a shoebox full of childhood artwork. "We thought he was an imaginary friend, but now we know he was my brother," Elena finished. "I was remembering him even when I couldn't consciously remember anything else." Elena studied the drawings with new eyes, seeing not the innocent artwork of a lonely child, but the desperate attempts of a traumatized 3-year-old to hold onto memories of the most important person in her life. In every picture, the boy had the same dark hair, the same features, and often the same crescent-shaped mark on his neck that Elena carried. As evening approached, Elena knew she had to contact General Webb and share what she had learned. But first, she needed to have one more conversation with the family that had shaped her life. "I want you all to understand something," Elena said as they sat around the dinner table, sharing Carmen's famous enchiladas. "Learning the truth about my origins doesn't diminish what we've built together. You saved me, raised me, loved me, and made me who I am. The woman who's going to search for her biological family was created by the family sitting at this table." Maria smiled through her tears. "So, I guess this means I'm going to have to get used to calling you Maria Elena?" "Just Elena is fine," Elena laughed. "I may be Maria Elena Mendoza legally, but I'll always be Elena to the people who matter most." That night, as Elena lay in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the posters and memories of her teenage years, she felt like she was balanced between two worlds. Behind her was the safe, loving world of the Vasquez family, a world built on partial truths but genuine affection. Ahead of her was the unknown world of Maria Elena Mendoza, a world that promised answers but also threatened danger. Tomorrow, she would call General Webb and begin the process of officially reclaiming her identity. She would start the search for her brother and for answers about her parents' sacrifice. She would step fully into a life that could put everyone she loved at risk. But tonight, she was still Elena Vasquez, sleeping in the room where she had dreamed of her future, surrounded by the family who had given her the strength to face whatever that future might hold. 6 months later, Elena stood in the sterile conference room of a government building whose location she wasn't allowed to disclose, studying surveillance photos of a man who might be her twin brother. The images were grainy and taken from a distance, showing a tall figure with dark hair and angular features that were hauntingly familiar. But his eyes held a coldness that Elena had never seen in her own reflection, and the way he carried himself suggested someone who had learned to navigate a very different world than the one she had grown up in. His name is Miguel Santos, General Webb said, sliding another folder across the conference table. At least, that's the name he's been using for the past 5 years. Before that, he was known as Marcus Silva, and before that, Daniel Rivera. He's very good at disappearing and reinventing himself. Elena picked up the folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents that told the story of a man who had lived on the edges of legality his entire adult life. There were arrest records for theft and fraud, though no convictions. There were immigration documents from multiple countries, all featuring slightly different photographs of the same face. There were financial records showing large sums of money moving through accounts in the Caribbean and Central America. "You're certain this is him?" Elena asked, though she could see the resemblance in every photograph. "DNA doesn't lie," Webb replied. "We obtained a sample from a coffee cup he discarded in Mexico City last month. It's a definitive match. Miguel Santos is Maria Elena Mendoza's twin brother." Elena studied the most recent photograph, taken outside a hotel in Guatemala City. The man in the image was her brother, but he looked like someone who had been shaped by violence and necessity rather than love and security. Where Elena had learned to trust others, Miguel appeared to have learned to trust no one. Where Elena had been taught to build relationships, Miguel seemed to have mastered the art of maintaining distance. "What exactly does he do?" Elena asked. "The reports are vague about his current activities." Webb's expression grew grim. "We believe he's involved in the same arms trafficking network that killed your parents. Whether he knows the connection or not, we can't say. But Miguel Santos has become a key facilitator in moving weapons from Central America to various conflict zones around the world." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Not only had her brother survived the attack that separated them, but he had somehow ended up working for the enemy, the same organization that had murdered their parents and destroyed their original family. How is that possible? Elena whispered. How does a 3-year-old victim become a criminal working for his parents' killers? It's more common than you might think, Webb explained. Criminal organizations often recruit children who have no other options. They provide food, shelter, and protection in exchange for loyalty and service. For a traumatized child with no memory of his origins, that organization becomes his family. Elena thought about her own childhood with Roberto and Carmen Vasquez, filled with family dinners and homework help and unconditional love. While she had been learning to ride bicycles and planning for college, her brother had been learning skills that would eventually make him one of the most wanted men in Central America. "There's something else you need to know," Webb continued. "Miguel isn't just a low-level operative. Our intelligence suggests he's being groomed for leadership within the organization. He's smart, ruthless, and completely loyal to the people who raised him." Elena studied another photograph, this one showing Miguel in an expensive suit, shaking hands with men whose faces had been blacked out for security reasons. He looked confident and comfortable, like someone who had found his place in the world. The thought that her twin brother had become everything their parents had fought against was almost unbearable. "What's the plan?" Elena asked. "How do we approach him?" Webb leaned back in his chair, studying Elena's face with the same intensity she had seen during their first meeting 6 months earlier. "That's the question we've been debating for weeks. Miguel Santos is heavily protected, constantly moving, and surrounded by people who would kill anyone they perceived as a threat. A direct approach could get you killed. But an indirect approach might not work either," Elena countered. "If he's as smart as you say he is, he'll see through any deception. And if he's learned not to trust anyone, then our only chance might be to appeal to something deeper than logic." Elena had spent the past 6 months working with Webb's team to understand the world her brother inhabited. She had learned about arms trafficking networks, studied the psychology of child soldiers, and familiarized herself with the power structures of Central American criminal organizations. The education had been brutal and enlightening, stripping away her assumptions about justice and morality. But she had also spent time with the other children from Operation Safe Harbor who had been located and contacted. Their stories had given her hope that even the most carefully constructed identity could be challenged by the truth. Sarah Martinez had grown up believing she was the daughter of a Mexican-American family in Texas, only to discover at age 30 that her real parents had been DEA agents killed while investigating a drug cartel. David Chun had lived as the adopted son of Chinese immigrants in California, never knowing that his biological parents had been murdered for helping American intelligence gather information about human trafficking routes. Each of these reunions had been complicated and emotional, but they had also been successful. The other survivors had embraced their true identities and were now working with Webb's team to locate the remaining missing children. Elena hoped that Miguel might be capable of a similar transformation. "There's one more factor we need to consider," Webb said, pulling out a final folder. "Miguel isn't alone. Our surveillance indicates that he's in a relationship with someone who may complicate our approach." Elena opened the folder to find photographs of a beautiful woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes. She appeared to be in her late 20s, and she was often photographed at Miguel's side during business meetings and social events. "Her name is Isabella Cortez," Webb explained. "She's the daughter of one of the organization's founding members, and she's been with Miguel for nearly 3 years. Our intelligence suggests she's more than just a girlfriend. She's his partner in both business and personal matters." Elena studied the photographs of Miguel and Isabella together, noting the easy intimacy between them and the way they seemed to complement each other in formal settings. "Are you saying she's another barrier between Miguel and the truth, or could she be an ally? That's what we need to find out." Isabella Cortez is highly educated, with degrees from universities in Switzerland and Colombia. She speaks 5 languages and has demonstrated strategic thinking that suggests she's much more than just an organized crime princess. If she's genuinely attached to Miguel, she might be protective of him. But if she's primarily loyal to the organization— Webb left the sentence unfinished, but Elena understood the implication. If Isabella viewed Elena as a threat to Miguel or to their shared criminal enterprise, she would likely